When we think of a leader and how they speak, we imagine them to be clear and concise. We imagine them to get their message across quickly and with precision. But not everyone has this natural ability. In fact, most people don't. Clear and concise communication is a skill that must be mastered. Once you are committed to this new way of communicating, you will see a dramatic change in the ease and precision at which your message gets across. You will speak and sound just like a leader does. And if you're looking for a great starting point, then this video and the 9 tips I share with you will help you with that. I'm Cara Ronan, leadership coach to emerging leaders. On this channel, I share with you videos that will help you in your leadership journey to learn the leadership skills that you need and the communication skills that you need to get promoted. Subscribe to my channel if you think this kind of content can help you. My first tip for clear and concise communication is to focus on one main point at a time. The reason I suggest this is because the clarity of your communication will be severely impacted by the amount of information and messages that you're trying to convey at the one time. If you overload your listener with too many messages, one after the other, they won't have enough time to process what you're saying. They won't have enough time to identify and pick out the main point that you're making. It's a bit like trying to find a needle in a haystack. If your communication is like the haystack, then your listener is going to have a really hard time trying to find the needle in that haystack, meaning they're going to have a really hard time trying to find the one main point you're trying to communicate. Here are some tips to help you communicate one main point at a time. Think before you speak. Spend some time planning out, thinking about the main points that you want to make. And when you do communicate those points, make sure you stick to one point at a time. Keep it simple, so use words that are simple and easy for your listener to understand. Use phrases that are simple for them to understand as well. Don't overload them with words or phrases that are too complex or difficult for them to understand, because they'll be focusing on that and they'll probably miss the main message and the main point that you want to make. Speak in chunks. So imagine when you are writing, you write in paragraphs. That is a chunk of text. When you are speaking, try to do the same thing. Try to link all your thoughts under the one main point that you are trying to make and talk about that one chunk of thought that you have. Second, you need to get to your main point quickly. This is a unique ability that clear and concise communicators have. They don't make you wait for their main point. They get to it quickly. They tell you straight up, right away, what their main point is. Unlike ramblers who follow a random path with a lot of detours before they get to their main point. Once your main point is communicated, then you can elaborate on it. You can expand on it using stories, examples, or analogies to really get that person interested in what you're saying and to back up what you're saying. Then at the end, you can loop back to your main point, repeat it and paraphrase it to really reinforce it in that person's mind. Third, you need to use short sentences. Short sentences are punchy, straight to the point, and easy to understand. They don't offer too much information. They allow you to get your message across quickly. Do you see what I did there? In 2 short sentences, I explained why short sentences are powerful. If you watch news reporters, you'll probably notice they speak in short sentences because they have a lot of complex information they need to convey to their listeners, and they don't have much time to do it in either. They need to be quick and precise with their communication, which is what you should aim for too if you want to sound more articulate and clear and concise when you speak. So how do you start to use shorter sentences? Get to the point quickly and don't over-explain. A lot of people tend to over-explain things. This makes the conversation and the communication really drawn out, and you risk having the other person become bored, forgetting what you say, not identifying what your main point is, and just simply losing interest. If you are unsure of whether your listener has clearly understood what you are saying, then I recommend that you ask them, have you understood what I've said so far? Are you following what I'm saying? At this point in the video, you might be a little bit worried about sounding like a robot when you speak. I completely understand this fear. I had it myself when I was first starting to learn how to communicate in a more concise way. But whenever we are changing something about our behavior or about our communication, at first it will feel weird because it is not what we're used to. It's different from the way we normally speak. And this triggers a form of anxiety in us, which makes us want to revert back to what we did before, to revert back to what feels comfortable, to what we know. But I encourage you to at least try these methods out. You might need to adapt them slightly depending on the person you are interacting and communicating with and the situation you're in. But over time, it will become a part of your natural communication style, and you'll become a lot more confident in using these different ways of communicating, and you'll definitely start to sound more concise when you speak. The first 3 points were more focused on the conciseness of your message, how to be concise when you speak. Now I want to turn our attention to the clarity of your voice, the clarity of your voice that you use when you speak. This is the clearness or lucidity as to the perception of understanding, according to dictionary.com. And when we're talking about a clear voice, we absolutely need to talk about volume. Speaking at a volume that is too low will lead to a quiet voice and will cause you to become a quiet speaker. When you are a quiet or a soft speaker, your communication isn't audible enough for people to hear your message. If they can't hear your message, then they won't be clear on what that message is. But at the same time, speaking in a volume that is too high, in a really loud voice, isn't good either because it becomes overbearing. People become more focused on the loudness of your voice rather than on your message. You need to regulate your volume for the people you're with and the situation you are in. If you're in a crowded room, raise your volume. If you're speaking to an elderly person with hearing-related difficulties, raise your volume. If you're talking one-on-one with someone, lower your volume. If you're speaking to someone or a number of people in a small room with no other background or environmental noise, lower your volume. In order for you to gauge and understand whether your volume is too high or too low or at a good level, you need to start to read other people's body language. If your volume is too low, you'll start to see other people straining to hear you. They might step closer to you. They might tilt their head. If your volume is too high, you might start to see people step back from you or away from the conversation. If they're sitting down, then they might start to lean back or strain their neck back to move themselves away from you to help to lower the volume so it's not as loud for them. So these are signs that you need to look for to detect and gauge whether your volume is too high or too low. And for tips on how to use breathing to increase your volume, if you're a soft speaker, you need to check out this video right here. Save it to your watch later list and watch it after this one. The next tip is to focus on your pronunciation. Pronunciation is where the sounds of your speech are pronounced, and it includes intonation, articulation, and stress. Basically, when the sounds of your speech are pronounced well, this will lead to clear speech. When the sounds of your speech are not pronounced well, it will lead to unclear or inarticulate speech. In order to produce clear sounds in your speech and improve your pronunciation, my 2 best tips are to clearly pronounce the beginning of the word and clearly pronounce the end of the word. Too often people omit or distort the first sound in the word or the last sound in the word. This often happens if you are speaking too fast, if you're a lazy speaker, or if you're trying to sound more casual because you're speaking with your friends. You see, what people do in these situations is they link the words together. They form a liaison between the words that they're using in their sentence. And while this is really important for a good flow of communication, when it's done in an extreme way, it can cause you to omit or distort important sounds in the words that you use, causing the listener to not have a clear idea of what you're saying. I'm going to give you an example of a sentence that is being said with bad pronunciation, where I'm really linking the words of that sentence together, which is probably going to make it hard for you to understand what the individual words are going to be. So here it is. This computer's out of order, but I can't get it fixed till tomorrow. So I'm trying really hard here to give you an example using Australian English, bad pronunciation using Australian English to say this sentence, but the complete sentence with good pronunciation is, this computer is out of order, but I can't get it fixed until tomorrow. So do you see the difference between these two examples? In the first example, I really link the words together. I don't pronounce properly the beginning or the end of the words. Some of the T's, for example, are changed to D's, so some of the sounds are really distorted in the sentence. And this can prevent the listener from understanding what you are saying. Number 6 is to remove filler words. I've spoken many times in a number of other videos about using filler words, but if you want a refresher, here are some examples. Right, like, you know, so. Filler words don't add any information to the communication piece. People mainly use them to buy themselves time so they can think of what their next point is going to be. But if you look at elegant, clear speakers, you will notice they don't use filler words in their communication. They don't use filler words because they know what their main point is and they can get to their main point quickly. If you want to know whether you use filler words or not, I recommend that you ask a friend or a colleague that you trust to listen when you communicate at work during meetings or during conversations and to tell you whether you use filler words in your communication or not and what those filler words are. When you start to identify if you use them and what filler words you tend to use more often, you can then become more conscious of it and then you can start to eliminate it from your communication. What I recommend you do is if you use filler words to buy yourself time when you speak, replace the filler word with a pause. In addition to what we've already talked about in this video, there are external elements that can impede the clarity of your speech and therefore your message. If there is some kind of environmental noise or distraction that is going to take your listener's attention away from what you're saying, for example, music, crowd noise, or some kind of machinery, then I recommend you try to remove or to reduce the volume of that noise. Wherever possible, try to raise the volume of your voice to improve the clarity. Change the location of where you are. Sometimes it helps to move away from noise that you can't do anything about and talk in a quieter environment. Monitoring your environment to detect any environmental noise or distraction is something that leaders who speak with clarity and precision do. It's also a good idea to monitor your audience to see if they can understand you. And the best way of doing this is by reading their body language. We spoke about this earlier in the video. Are they focused on you? Or are they looking around the room or at something or somebody else? Do they look bored? Do they look confused? Monitor the people you're speaking to see if there's anything you need to do with your communication to help it come across in a clearer way. I also recommend that you open up the conversation for a discussion. This is where people can ask you questions. If they didn't understand something, they can ask you to repeat it. If you need to clarify something, then you can repeat it yourself. The listener can also rephrase or repeat what you've said. This will help them to reinforce the main points so they really stick in their mind. And you also give them the opportunity to add in their own thoughts so you can really make it into a two-way conversation. Because being clear and concise, it isn't done in a vacuum. You need to make sure other people understand what you're saying, they understand what your message is, and you also need to engage them in the conversation. I have a whole playlist on how to be more articulate and well-spoken. You will find it on the screen up here. Take a look through the videos, pick out 2 to 3 videos that you think you're interested in, and save it to your watch later list on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you got a lot of valuable content from it, and I will see you next week in another video.